Good morning. The Hearing Board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. The time is 9:00 a.m., and we are meeting in the Hearing Board room in Diamond Bar. We have actually three matters, I'll say, on the calendar for this morning. It says we would begin with the election, the yearly election of the chair and then the vice chair of the hearing board. But first, before we do that, and then we have one regular hearing, which is Eastern Municipal Water District. But before that, we have one new member of the board beginning today, Mr. Mohan Balagopalan. And we have to have Mr. Balagopalan sworn in, as well as myself for my new term. So I'm going to hand over this portion of the hearing to Madam Clerk.
Good morning. Can I ask that you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I state your name.
I, Julie Prusak,
During such time as I hold the above office,
during such times as I hold the above office,
do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
and that I would well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. Thank you. And with that, we
Shouldn't
will,
we have voted for her first?
this is my last duty as chair. And now, Madam Clerk, we will move on to the election of the chair.
At this time, I will open the floor for nominations for chair.
I nominate Julie Prusak for chair.
I'll second that.
Okay. Are there any further nominations? Okay, I see no further nominations. I'll close the floor. Those in favor of Madam Prusak for chair, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Seeing none, the ayes have it, and Julie Prusak is elected chair. At this time, I will open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Patricia Byrd for vice chair.
I second that nomination.
Is there any further nominations? Seeing none, I will close the floor to nominations. Those in favor of Patricia Byrd for vice chair, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say no. Seeing none, the ayes have it, and Ms. Patricia Byrd is elected vice chair.
Thank you. Thank you, fellow board members. I know it was a little bit of a learning curve last year, becoming chair, and I hope to fully perform in this next coming year, so thank you for your vote. Okay, we will now turn, and thank you, Madam Clerk. We will now turn to our one hearing for this morning, and that is Eastern Municipal Water District, case number 4937-58, and it is for a short variance. And who is representing Eastern Municipal Water District this morning?
Curtis Coleman.
Thank you. And who is representing the executive officer?
Daphne Sue.
Thank you. And before we begin, I'd like to ask anyone who wishes to testify this morning to please stand to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Your opening for today.
Thank you. Seems like only yesterday we were here and you heard about the expansion project going on at the Temecula Valley Water Reclamation Facility. Today, we're here for a short variance for a fairly small but very significant portion of that project. As you will hear, or you may have gleaned from the petition, and as we advised you at the last hearing, there is currently a new an additional treatment process, Plant 3, that is under construction. And one of the things that has to be done with these wastewater processes is gas that contains hydrogen sulfide must be vented to some type of equipment that will reduce the hydrogen sulfide to avoid odor issues. And at the Temecula Valley facility, that's done through a biofilter. So currently, the plants 1 and 2 are connected to the biofilter, and there is a need to construct some temporary piping to replace some piping from plant 2, and set it up for tie-in between plant 3 and the biofilter. And the work is proposed to be accomplished in 2 stages, where the initial stage will involve disconnecting the current piping and connecting it to temporary piping. That work will take 2 to 6 hours on one day. And then when the permanent piping is completed and ready for hookup, they will disconnect the line from the temporary piping and reconnect it to the permanent piping. And again, that's expected to take 2 to 6 hours on a separate day. We expect all this work to be done within 90 days from today. We just don't know exact dates. The one clarification we'd like to make, the petition indicated that when this work is being done, the biofilter will be, the fan to the biofilter will be turned off and shut down. And Ms. Torres, as you may, last week was with the 4th of July in the middle of the week and coming off of the previous variance hearing, there were some people on vacation last week, and she just learned late yesterday that the expectation is that the biofilter will remain on the whole time unless something happens, that it has to be shut down. But currently, we expect that the biofilter will remain in operation. However, when the pipes are disconnected and before they can be tied back into the temporary piping, the wastewater treatment process under number 2 will not be fully venting to the biofilter. In other words, so that broken connection there for that brief period of time will still make the facility in violation of the permit condition that requires that the foul air be vented to the biofilter at all times. The Eastern Municipal Water District and the South Coast District have agreed on conditions for monitoring and reporting and notice to the district before these connections, these tie-ins are made, and monitoring both downwind of the specific connections and fence line monitoring for hydrogen sulfide emissions to assure that there's not an odor nuisance situation that could be created. We don't expect that to happen. The sources of the hydrogen sulfide will be covered, and these tie-in periods will be very brief, and chemicals will be injected as necessary into the treatment process to minimize hydrogen sulfide formation as required to prevent odor situations. So again, this is a short, basically 2 days within a 90-day window where the activities involved will, the violation is failure to vent the emissions from the wastewater process to the biofilter, and this will be for a period, as I indicated, 2 to 6 hours each time. The district, I believe, has conditions that include diagrams of where the monitoring is to take place, and the conditions are acceptable to Eastern Municipal, and I have Ms. Torres here to present the rest of the evidence for this case.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Ms. Sue, you're opening, and then if we could get a copy of the conditions that are proposed.
Yes, I've already handed the conditions to the clerk. The district does not oppose the facilities petition for a variance. As they've mentioned, they've agreed to propose conditions, including minimizing the time existing foul air sources are not vented to the biofilter. They will also monitor the hydrogen sulfide levels prior to any disconnection of the pipes, and they will also monitor these levels during the work. If the perimeter hydrogen sulfide levels exceed 30 parts per billion, it will implement odor mitigation measures downwind of the vent sources. Thank you. The district will not be presenting any affirmative witnesses.
Thank you. If we could get the copies passed out, and we'll start just by reviewing those conditions so that we can be
There are
fully
2
informed.
exhibits that are referenced in the conditions that are aerial photos that show the monitoring location, so we probably need to see those too.
Oh, great. We've received the proposed variance conditions, and we'll mark those as Exhibit A for the executive officer. No, the proposed variance conditions. Oh. Okay, well, we'll remark it. These aerial photos are from Eastern Municipal Water District?
We are submitting them. The district is submitting them.
District is submitting them. Okay. All right, then I will mark them as, let me remark that then. There is an aerial photograph that already is marked as Exhibit A. We will keep that as Exhibit A. There is another aerial photograph that is marked as Exhibit B. We will keep that as Exhibit B. And then we will mark the proposed variance conditions as Exhibit C, as in Charlie, rather than as A. And then before we begin, I think we'll take about 5 minutes for, off the record, for the hearing board members to review the proposed variance conditions. So we are off the record. We are back on the record. And Mr. Coleman, if you may introduce your witness.
Yes. Call Allison Torres. Ms. Torres, please state your name and spell your name for the record.
Allison Torres, first name Alison, last name Torres.
And were you sworn as a witness a few moments ago?
Yes,
You understand you're testifying under oath?
yes.
What is your position with Eastern Municipal Water District?
I'm the Senior Air Quality Compliance Analyst for our Environmental Services Division.
And how long have you held that position?
I've held that position for 5 years. I've been an analyst for about 12 years.
Okay. Have you reviewed the petition for variance filed in this matter?
Yes,
Now, are the matters stated in that petition true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
yes, but we just want to provide clarification on item 20, which you mentioned in your opening with regard to the biofilter being shut down. That will not occur.
Okay. Will you please describe what Eastern Municipal Water District is and what services it provides?
Yes, Eastern Municipal Water District is a California special district providing public services including drinking water supply, fire flows, sewage collection and treatment, and water reclamation services to customers in the western Riverside County area. Wastewater is collected and treated at the Temecula Valley wastewater facility.
And what type of equipment is involved in this variance request?
The equipment includes the wastewater treatment process and the biofilter at the facility. Our wastewater treatment process produces gases at low levels of hydrogen sulfide, which is an odorous compound, and that gas is collected and sent to the biofilter, which reduces the odors.
Is that equipment operated pursuant to district permits to operate?
Yes, the wastewater treatment process is operated pursuant to permit to construct/operate G52578 with application number 597065, and the biofilter is operated pursuant to permit to operate G31256 with application number 558467.
And are true and correct copies of those permits attached to the variance petition?
Yes, they are exhibits 1 and 2.
Can you please describe the circumstances that have led up to you to Eastern Municipal Water District seeking this variance?
Yes, EMWD is currently in the construction phase of an expansion project to increase the capacity of the Temecula Valley facility to 23 million gallons per day by adding a third wastewater processing train, which is called Plant 3. The foul air from the new Plant 3 processing train needs to be vented to the biofilter, and a portion of the piping coming from the Plant 2 primary clarifiers needs to be replaced to facilitate that connection. In order to accomplish this, the contractor will install a temporary bypass pipe to direct the foul air from the existing sources to the biofilter while the underground piping is installed. Once the new piping is installed, the temporary piping will be disconnected and the new piping will be connected to the sources.
Okay, I'm going to show you a, purports to be an aerial photo of the facility. Can you describe that?
Yes, this is a facility aerial of the Temecula Valley wastewater treatment plant.
Is this a different aerial than A or B?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's not as marked up. This is more specific to the, where the work is going on.
So let's mark, we have, I'm sorry, Temecula Valley Regional Water Reclamation Facility. It's a facility aerial. This one has biofilter and Plant 3 marked on it, and we will mark that as Exhibit 1.
We had, I believe, 4 exhibits, or 4 exhibits attached to the
Yes.
petition.
Okay, so we will mark the exhibits to the petition as they are marked. Already in attachment to the petition. I believe that there are 4 of them, 2 permits to operate, a notice of violation is Exhibit 3, and Exhibit Oh, no, 1 permit to operate, 1 notice of violation, 1 reported, oh, sorry, no, it is. 2 permits to operate, notice of violation, and a bypass piping connection schematic. Those are exhibits 1 through 4, and this facility aerial with the biofilter and plant 3 marked on it will be exhibit 5.
Thank you.
Okay, so in this facility aerial, it basically is a aerial of the Temecula Valley facility with the biofilter on the north side, and then that rectangular shape where the plant 3 is called out, that is the new plant 3 train. So the work of disconnecting the existing piping and connecting the temporary piping, as mentioned, will be done in less than 1 day. Likewise, the work of disconnecting the temporary piping and connecting the new piping will also be done in less than 1 day. At this time, we don't know the exact dates when they will occur, other than that it will be within a 90-day period from the date the existing piping is disconnected and the temporary piping connected. We do currently anticipate a 2-week duration in between the first connection of the temporary piping for them to install the permanent piping. We expect the tie-in work will take about 2 to 6 hours on each day to complete, but it could go longer if problems are encountered. The vented sources will be in operation to support the continued wastewater treatment process. However, these sources are covered and closed. In addition, after further review by the contractor, the biofilter fans should remain in operation during the tie-ins. And it's also important to mention that the periods in which fugitive emissions could release from the connection points is a very brief portion, estimated to be about 30 minutes of the overall 2 to 6 hour tie-in period.
I show you Exhibit B that has been put forward by executive officer, and do you recognize that?
Yes.
Can you describe what that it depicts, including the piping and proposed monitoring locations?
Yeah, so this is an overview of the where the biofilter is located, and then to the southern portion of the diagram, you'll see the new Plant 3 primaries is called out there, which is the northern part of that overall Plant 3 train. And then just south of that is the existing Plant 2 primaries, and then to the left is the headworks. So this diagram is showing the existing underground piping, which is the blue line, basically going from the existing Plant 2 primaries to the biofilter. And it's showing that the new piping that will be installed is that the red line. So that's piping coming from Plant 3, and then it will connect, the Plant 2 primaries will connect to that new piping. So that kind of curved segment of the existing blue piping going to the Plant 2 primaries will be replaced with that new connection. And the green line is the temporary bypass piping. By installing this bypass piping, it will allow the foul air from the Plant 2 primaries to continue to be treated by the biofilter while the contractor is installing the new underground piping, which is the red area. So the numbers here, the 1 and 2, are the 2 connection points where the bypass piping, the green line, is connected over at the Plant 2 primaries and then over at the biofilter fan. And so with that, there are 2 proposed monitoring areas that are near where these tie-ins are taking place.
Were those monitoring locations chosen because of the anticipated wind direction and the direction toward potential receptors downwind?
The locations were chosen because they are relatively close to where the piping will be open for the very brief duration. The perimeter monitoring locations are chosen based on wind direction.
Okay. Now, what rule or rules will EMWD be violating during the tie-in period?
So currently, we're not in violation of any rules. However, once we disconnect the foul air piping from the sewage treatment process to the biofilter, we'll be in violation of Condition 5 in Permit G52578 and Condition number 8 in Section K of our Title 5 permit, which means we'll be in violation of Rule 203B and Rule 3002C1 until the temporary piping can be reconnected. Likewise, once the new piping is ready for connection, we'll be in violation of those same conditions and rules when the temporary piping is disconnected until the new piping is connected. We expect the biofilter to be in operation during these periods. However, if the biofilter does need to be shut down during the tie-in work, we would also be in violation of Condition 5 in Permit G31256.
Now, I noticed that condition number 5 in the biofilter permit allows the biofilter to be shut down for up to 96 hours while the wastewater treatment process is operating. Did you check with the air quality district staff to see if this condition would apply to the disconnection and tie-in you have planned?
Yes, we did. We were advised that the condition only applies to maintenance of the biofilter and that not other types of tie-ins or shutdowns.
Would operations under this variance be similar to operations under condition number 5 in the biofilter permit?
Yes, except as mentioned, we should be able to keep the biofilter fans in operation. In addition, these events proposed here in the variance will be for much shorter periods of time compared to those allowed under the current permit. And we will also be doing additional monitoring under this variance that's not required under Condition 5 of the biofilter permit.
Have you considered curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance?
We cannot curtail operations. The wastewater treatment facility is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, receiving inflows of wastewater, and we can't control how much is received by the facility.
Will you reduce excess emissions to the minimum amount possible?
Yes, plant personnel will monitor odors and H2S levels around the plant boundaries downwind and at the connection points as required by the conditions we've agreed with district staff. Plant personnel will also adjust injection levels of H2S reducing chemicals as necessary to minimize odor generation.
Okay, I show you District's Exhibit A. Can you describe what that shows?
Yes, Exhibit A shows a aerial of the facility, and the downwind perimeter monitoring locations are identified with the orange lines. There are 5 areas that will be monitored downwind of the biofilter, and then the 2 connection locations are identified with the red dots. Those are the 2 the monitoring locations near the tie-ins that will also take place.
And how do you plan to achieve compliance with the applicable South Coast District requirements?
We will reconnect the necessary piping to vent the appropriate equipment to the biofilter as quickly as possible.
And what would the effect on Eastern Municipal Water District and the public, what would the effect be if you could not make these pipe tie-ins under this variance?
EMWD would be liable for civil penalties for violation of Rule 203 and 3002 because we would not be in compliance with Permit Condition 5. EMWD can't complete the expansion project without being able to install the new connections and the new and replacement piping to the biofilter from Plant 2 and the new Plant 3. This will lead to serious public health hazard if the facility has insufficient capacity to handle the influent.
Do you expect any excess emissions during the variance period?
The contractor will set up the piping and prep the connection points to minimize the period in which there will be any release from those tie-in connection locations. Therefore, the tie-in periods are expected to be very brief, so excess emissions will be minimized. In addition, the vented sources they'll remain covered and closed, and the biofilter fans will remain in operation, so they'll be actively drawing fresh air into the piping. Also, EMWD plant operations staff will be monitoring near the connection points for hydrogen sulfide.
And can you quantify the emissions during the variance period?
Yes, we plan to, as discussed previously, periodically monitor near the connection points for hydrogen sulfide emissions as required by the conditions we've agreed to with district staff, and then we'll work with district staff to determine the appropriate means of quantifying those emissions.
And for what period of time are you requesting the variance?
We're requesting a variance for a period of 2 non-contiguous days within a 90-day window that will commence on the day that the vented plant 2 primaries are disconnected to allow for the tie-in to the temporary foul air piping, and ends on the day that the tie-in to the permanent new foul air piping is complete.
And do you expect that to be completed within 90 days from today?
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat, you said something within a 90-day window. Can you just repeat that portion one more time?
Sure. So we're requesting the variance for a period of 2 non-contiguous days within a 90-day window that will commence on the day that the vented plant 2 primaries are disconnected to allow for the tie-in to the temporary foul air piping, and ends on the day the tie-in to the permanent new foul air piping is complete.
Have you reviewed the variance conditions proposed by the South Coast District staff?
Yes.
And are those conditions acceptable to Eastern Municipal Water District?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Sue, do you have any questions for Ms. Torres?
Ms. Torres, referring you to condition number 7, which says that if the perimeter hydrogen sulfide levels exceeds 30 parts per billion, the petitioner shall implement odor mitigation measures. What are some types of odor mitigation measures that the facility would be undertaking?
We have misters that we can put a deodorizer in to place over by the perimeter, which has like a citrus scent to kind of mask any odors.
Are there other mitigation measures that the facility would take, or would it only be the misters?
We inject ferric chloride at the headworks so we can increase the dosing of that.
Great, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Questions, board members? Ms. Byrd has a question. Do you want someone else to ask a question? Okay. Senator, did you have a question?
Very well explained. However, I want more detail, specificity on Exhibit 4. And maybe you should go to the board so people watching this know what's going on. It's a simplified diagram of the discussion that you provided to us so far on step 1 and step 2. And you show the connect and disconnect. You show in page 4 of 9, item 14, second paragraph, talk about a T. You also talk about a flange connection. That's explaining in all of it, I think.
Oh. Let's see.
No, now I've just turned it around.
Maybe if it shows again. Okay. Not sure about how to adjust the focus on this. Maybe this.
Just walk us through this operation. When you get to a T, you explain why you're crossing over and connected T for the purpose of relocating the pipes. You also hide the flange play in that operation as well.
Yeah, so Sorry, I'm left-handed, so this is a awkward position for me. Okay, so this obviously isn't the aerial, but up here is the new Plant 3 primaries. You've got the whole train here, but this is the Plant 3. So that's where the new piping will come out of Plant 3. And then this is the existing Plant 2 primary clarifiers that currently runs over to the biofilters. There's other plant processes, which includes the headworks, that connect also to the biofilter. So this connection is not being impacted. The foul air coming from the Plant 2 primaries needs to be temporarily directed to the fans through a bypass pipe. So this is just roughly illustrating that connection here at the Plant 2 primaries.
That's where you insert the T?
So on this plant, the picture here on the bottom, I don't know if you can see that. They call it a nozzle, but it's basically adhered to the existing fiberglass piping, and then they will set up the bypass piping here, and then they will they will cut into through that nozzle. They'll cut into the existing piping, and then they will bolt the bypass piping to that connection. So that is at the Plant 2 primaries, and then a similar connection is over at the biofilter fans. Does that answer your question?
Could you point directly to the T into the flange operation when you bypass?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
It says right here that your contractor must install a piping T onto the existing pipe. Where is that done?
Yeah, that's here.
Right over there?
Yeah, this is the T here.
And they also talk about the flanging to isolate the operation of the process. Where is that done? Shown?
Oh, yes, that's right down here. There's this.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah, it is hard to see there, but that's basically a break in the pipe, so they will install a flange in that.
Okay, what's the purpose of the plant processor?
What's the purpose?
Processes, I mean, that's off to the side, which would not be altered or disturbed in any way. That's
The other plant processes? Is that
other plant process.
Yeah, it's just to illustrate, yeah, that as long as the fans are still in operation, the fans will still be drawing foul air from the other processes and treating them, and they won't be impacted by this connection. If the fans were shut down, then foul air from these other processes wouldn't actively be drawn, but those processes are also covered, so you shouldn't get fugitive emissions.
At what point is the hydrogen sulfide is emitted into the atmosphere if it's not utilized?
At what point is
The hydrogen sulfide gas is emitted into the atmosphere? Because you're measuring it. At what point in this diagram that happens?
Well, the only really potential locations for that would be at the exhaust of the biofilter cells, which it would treat the H2S, so the levels would be low. And then at the 2 tie-in locations at each end, where when they cut into the pipe and they connect the bypass pipe, that brief, 20, 30 minutes of time to do that work is where there could be some fugitive release.
So you put your monitor somewhere in the plant area, looking at Exhibit B, where the big red dot. So can you show us on this diagram where that, and you're monitoring the hydrogen sulfide into the atmosphere at that point in time?
Yeah, so
And
where
then
the red dots are is where we would monitor.
Red dot, right.
Because the construction work will be occurring in this area. So this is near the connection point. So right here where that green line ends, that's basically where this picture is. So when they cut into this pipe through that nozzle and then adhere the bypass piping, connect the 2 pipes, that's where you could get some fugitive release, but it's for a brief period of time, and it's not anticipated to be much.
In accordance to the stipulated agreement, you would monitor the emission of hydrogen sulfide and on a daily basis, I believe, and keep a record and report that to the district. Therefore, it suggests that at some point in time, you emitting an excessive amount of hydrogen sulfide gases. That's why you had the monitor there. At what point in this diagram did this happen?
It really isn't expected to be excessive. It's a precaution to monitor in those locations because that's the only locations where you could get.
Would it be any amount at all, you think?
Would there be any?
Yeah,
Possibly not.
not significant, but maybe some, maybe, huh?
Maybe.
If it's not at all, you don't need to monitor there if it's not at all.
True. It's, like I said, it's a precaution
Thank you.
to satisfy the.
Thank you. Ms. Byrd, did you remember your question?
Yeah, the problem is some were answered. I have kind of all over the place. You can have a seat. No, you can.
No, let's give Ms. Torres a moment to get back to her seat. It's okay.
It's okay. Some of the questions are specifically from the petition, and that's why I was just flipping back through. And the petition makes a statement that low levels of H2S are produced in this process. And I guess I was wondering, low levels as compared to what? What is a low level? What does that mean?
Well, the outlet limit on the biofilter is 1 ppm. So the biofilter has like a 99% control efficiency. So I guess low is relative. It's not.
Okay. You weren't pulling that from a scale of this is high, this is low. You're just
No.
speaking in relative terms. Yeah. Okay. And then the relationship of the NOV to your present request?
The NOV it was just for the facility in general. It was any deviation with excess emissions that occurred at this facility that was reported in the 2016 and 2017 annual certification report. So there were a couple events for H2S exceeding the 5 pounds per day H2S limit at the facility that were reported in those 2016 and 2017 semi-annual reports, but they're not ongoing violations.
Okay. And when you did mention biofilters, we're talking about both of them, right? When you're talking about what is included in the variance, because there's two.
Yeah, the permit covers, there's basically 2 fans and 2 cells that draw the air from the process, so it does include both cells and both fans.
Okay. Then just one thing you didn't mention was there, and this may have been mentioned in some previous variance hearing because you guys have come for a few, the facility expansion, the reason at this time for the facility expansion is what?
It's based on projected growth in the area to make sure that we can properly treat the anticipated growth in the area, that we have sufficient ability to treat that incoming wastewater.
Okay. Some of these questions I just asked because I just want it on the record, just so you know.
Yeah, no worries.
And then in the petition, it says only 6 hours within 2 non-contiguous days. But then I've heard you say 2 to 6 hours, I think, someplace. And then someplace else in the conditions, I think it says 12 hours. I'm just trying to follow exactly what.
Yeah, the 6 hours I think is, so for the first tie-in where they attach the bypass piping, that's expected to be a shorter duration than the second tie-in when they're basically disconnecting the bypass piping and then connecting it to the new permanent piping. So to cover both of those tie-in periods, that's why the range is provided. So the 2 hours is kind of, that's what's expected, but you never know if there's going to be brief delays. So the first tie-in is expected to be like 2 to 4 hours, and then the second is more on the order of 4 to 6. However, that includes setting up the piping, and it's not the period of time when the piping is open. Basically, everything will be set up so that the period of time when they cut into the pipe and actually make the connection to the bypass is very brief. So it's like a 30-minute window within those 2 to 6 hour windows, if that makes sense.
I guess I'm not following you. It says the condition number 3 says shall not exceed 12 hours per day during each of 2 non-contiguous days. I read that to say that it may be 12 hours on either of those days. Is that the way?
Yeah, the district included the 12 hours in there, I think, as a, just to make sure that the time was covered, but likely we won't utilize 12 hours. I think it's, if there are unexpected delays, it covers the time period.
If you have other questions, I have a question
Okay, go ahead.
related to that, if that's okay. I also am confused. First of all, you're actually not asking for any variance from any H2S limit, are you? It's just from disconnection.
Correct.
Okay, so that's important. But with the timing, so 30 minutes is what's anticipated to be the maximum amount of time where there might be excess release of H2S?
Yes,
And that's based on your contractors?
yes,
Okay. The 2 to 6 hours is the window for connection, disconnection on both ends.
yes.
But that's in a covered space, or there won't, through that 2 to 6 hours, you don't anticipate H2S emissions, and why not during that entire 2 to 6 hours?
Because the 2 to 6 hours is the time for them to set up the pipe, remove install the nozzles on here onto the 2 connection points, and then the period of time where, so basically everything's set up, so that's in that 2 to 6 hour period. So they would remove the flange, and then they would cut into the piping. So they would drill a hole and, remove outside the exterior, and then bolt on the piping connection. So that's not expected to be a long duration for that portion of the overall work.
And during that 2 to 6 hours, it's not connected to the biofilter as it's required to be by condition 5 of the permit?
Not properly, because it's somewhat open to the environment at that point.
But not, H2S is not anticipated to escape during that time?
No.
Okay. And then, as Ms. Bird was asking, the 12 hours, that's allowing additional time not to be connected to the biofilter, and that's because it's possible that the work could take longer to connect?
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know how likely it will be to take closer to 12 hours.
And then you've actually asked for 2 days, which I would think is 24 hours in the variance. So that's even more time. Do you anticipate you need that much time, or should we limit it to 12 hours? Or I just want to make sure that the request is not even broader than the 12 hours that I believe you're saying you don't believe you require.
Yeah, I mean, we could change that to 12 hours total rather than per day.
Thank you. I have other questions, but I will wait. I know Ms. Bird had other questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. There is also, in the petition, and I could have missed it when you were going through the rules that you expected to violate. Did you mention in number 9 is where they're listed? Did you say something about section K, condition 8? Did I miss that?
I did
Why?
mention it.
Okay, and that was based on, because I don't believe, at least in what I looked through here, I couldn't find that part of the permit.
Section K is a section of the Title V permit that basically says you have to comply with all the conditions in your operating permits. So,
Okay,
yeah, it's kind of a blanket
okay.
condition.
And I think I have one more. The contractor that you're using, is this the same contractor that you've used on other projects for expansions?
I'm not 100% sure if it's the same. I believe we've used them before, but I don't know for a large expansion project or not.
Have you done anything similar to this at other locations? And if so, what emissions? Were there any
We,
emissions?
several years ago when we did an expansion at one of our other wastewater facilities, we did do a tie-in to the new biofilter system where we took the chemical scrubber offline. I don't know offhand what the emissions were without going back and looking specifically at that case. It was probably, I don't know, 2010.
Because you're stating that you're not expecting any emissions. Anything's possible, but you're not expecting any emissions
Not anything,
because you,
yeah, significant. The air is still being drawn to the biofilter. Any slight release should be very minimal.
okay, thank you.
My first question is, can you describe the surrounding area and how close is the nearest resident or sensitive receptor? Do you know?
Yes, so let's see, if we look at, if I can find it in my pile here, the aerial, the facility aerial, so on that northern boundary and even on the eastern boundary, those are all commercial. So the nearest resident is like 5,000 feet away from the facility.
Thank you. Okay, that was answered. When you were going over the rules from which you are seeking a variance, you mentioned 203B for your permit to operate. In the petition, it states 202A. Are you also seeking variance for that because it's a permit to construct/operate?
Yeah, so I mean,
Probably should.
we want to be covered because it's a permit to construct/operate. So I don't, if it's best to list both of those.
I think that would probably be best. Okay, and then the last question I had has to do with the conditions, the proposed conditions, and number 7. And I just was wondering if you know why. In number 7, the trigger is if the perimeter H2S level exceeds 30 parts per billion, and the odor mitigation measures would be implemented. Is there anything particular about why that threshold was chosen? Do you know?
It's a California standard for odors. It's a California odor threshold standard for perimeters. So I believe it's, I can't recall if it's in our permit as a condition as well because of that. Let's see here.
Do you know if it's in place to prevent nuisances?
Yes, to prevent nuisance.
Okay. And what do you anticipate, just so that it sounds, you're not requesting any variance from, to exceed your H2S levels, so that we can balance in our deliberations. It sounds like you're not anticipating, and I just want to hear you say that on the record, you're not anticipating significant exceedances of what you normally have of H2S, is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Balagopalan.
Yes, I have a few questions. Now, you mentioned you're a Title V facility, but you're not seeking a alternative operating condition at this time, right?
No.
No, okay. Now, you mentioned the fans will be on, the biofilter, the fans will be on. I know in the petition it said it'll be off. Do you know what was the decision to keep it on during the, versus turning it off?
Yeah, I think that they had concerns with attaching those nozzles, that for some reason it was going to cause an issue keeping the fans in operation. But as Kurt mentioned, I just learned yesterday that the intent is to keep the fans on because the actual connection is fairly short. It'd probably take longer to actually turn the fans off than to keep them on.
So even when they're doing that 20-minute period, when they're doing the actual connection, it'll still be on then?
Yes.
So the biofilter essentially is working at all times,
Yes,
controlling the emissions from all the sources?
yes.
Okay. Now, the perimeter monitoring, do you know what kind of instruments you have to do that?
Yeah, we have a Jerome meter by Arizona Instruments for hydrogen sulfide monitoring.
And you have how many of those?
We have 1 meter per facility, so we have one at that facility.
So you're going to do potentially five perimeter monitoring, going around the perimeter to check on that, of the 30 parts per billion, the state, which is the state ambient air quality standard for H2S for odor threshold and for health effects. Which is,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
so your permit allows you, I mean, it says not to exceed 0.84 parts per million, which is higher than the threshold, is 0.03 at the fence line. So is there normally a drop from that biofilter to the fence line? Do you normally see that? I mean, have you been monitoring at the fence line? What kind of readings are you getting?
Yeah, actually, we do monitor at the fence line just to show compliance with the state standard. And let's see, we have like 0.005, 0.002, those parts per million.
At the fence line?
Yeah.
And you're measuring how much, you're not exceeding the permit limit at the biofilters?
No.
Okay. So you don't anticipate at any time exceeding permit condition number 8 while you're doing the connection, which is 0.84 ppm?
No, we don't.
Now, looking at the Exhibit C, which is the variance condition, proposed variance condition, on number 4, it said that you'll add appropriate chemicals to reduce the H2S concentration. Now, besides H2S, what other gases do you have that causes odors at the facility? H2S is not the only odorous compound that is emitted from the headworks and the other areas, am I right?
Yeah, I mean, there's potentially some other volatile compounds, but H2S is the main odor compound. And we inject ferric chloride at the headworks to help control the formation of H2S in the gas stream.
Yeah, that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Board members, any other questions for Ms. Torres? Seeing none, thank you. Mr. Coleman, any other witnesses?
No, I would just ask that our exhibits be admitted into evidence.
Ms. Sue, any objections?
No objections.
Okay, then exhibits 1 through 5 are in evidence, and
We would stipulate that A, B, and C could be admitted into evidence as well.
Ms. Sue,
Great, thank you.
all exhibits are in evidence. Okay, Ms. Sue, do you have any witnesses? I think you said you have none. Is that correct? Okay, then I'm going to ask if any member of the public wishes to be heard on this matter today. Seeing none, Mr. Coleman, your closing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Eastern Municipal Water District is seeking this variance in order to allow it to complete a necessary step in its expansion project at the Temecula Valley facility to increase the capacity to 23 million gallons per day. This involves the tie-in of the new Plant 3 treatment process to the biofilter that controls foul air generated in the wastewater treatment process. Variance is needed because in order to install the permanent piping, a portion of the existing piping from Plant 3 to the biofilter needs to be removed. To allow for a tie-in with Plant 3 that necessitates installing temporary piping. So there will be 2 periods when the existing piping is disconnected and temporary piping is connected, where the wastewater treatment process coming out of Plant 2 will not be entirely vented to the biofilter. This would be a violation of the permit conditions that we've identified. As indicated, we do not expect to have emissions of H2S in excess of, in a quantity sufficient that would create a public nuisance or violate the permit conditions in the biofilter permit. Monitoring will be conducted close to the tie-in locations and at the FETS line to assure that the H2S levels are either non-existent or low enough to not create a problem with nuisance or exceeding the state air standard for H2S ambient levels. If levels in excess of that ambient standard are detected, additional chemicals will be injected to reduce H2S formation, and potentially a maskant could be used, but at this point we don't expect that this will be necessary given the brief time that the venting will be interrupted and the fact that the biofilter will remain operational, venting all the other processes to it. This is something that needs to be done and is going to be done in a manner as quickly as possible to minimize the amount of time that the venting does, the venting of the foul air to the biofilter is interrupted, the minimum interruption time possible. And we think that the conditions that have been proposed will assure that the progress can be monitored by the district, that the amount of time will be minimized, that the monitoring will be done to assure that excess emissions do not occur, and that this can be accomplished as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Ms. Sue, your closing.
The facility testified that it will minimize the time future emissions might be emitted. It agreed to monitoring at several locations, including at the perimeter, and agreed to also do further mitigation measures if necessary to prevent odor from going into the community. Further, the facility also said it is willing to reduce the required variance period to 12 hours total. We think that with these steps, the facility is doing its best to minimize any effects into the community. Thanks.
Thank you. Board members, let's begin discussion. Ms. Bird, did you want to begin?
I'll start. Living in the inland area and knowing what the growth is like, I'm not surprised that EMWD has to take efforts to expand their facilities throughout wherever they have them in that area. So because of that and understanding that, I'll go, if you like, I'll just go through the findings.
That's great. You can start.
Okay. That the petitioner will be in violation of a rule, regulation, or of the district. So to disconnect this piping, petitioner to provide the temporary piping, which is not allowed within their permit, and to install the temporary piping while they put everything in place so they can have permanent piping, they will be in violation of their permit, the sections that were mentioned in the petition itself. This is due to beyond their reasonable control. Wastewater, as we know, is not one of those things that you can stop. One of the questions I'm always tempted to ask is, has it ever happened, and what happens when it does? I don't know if I want to know. But so wastewater is one of those things that you cannot stop. It's coming. You have to deal with it when it comes. In this situation, petitioner is also an essential public service in that it is providing the wastewater treatment. So it's definitely beyond their reasonable control. Taking, the downside is against the public as much as it is against the facility. So, and there's no such thing as closing it, so I don't think I even have to address closing a lawful business. The closing or taking without a corresponding benefit, of course, as I said, there is no closing of the facility. The applicant has considered curtailing. There is no curtailing of the wastewater that's coming in as well. But one of the things that they are doing, that they will be doing in finding number 5, is that during this time they will be monitoring. They have the ability to monitor at the fence line. They currently monitor at the fence line, but they will also have monitoring at points where there may likely be some odors, and so they will be monitoring at those points. They will be mitigating by injecting an increase in ferrous chloride where possible or where necessary, as well as they have the potential to provide an odorizer, a neutralizer in the event that they're having some odor issues. They don't expect to have any, but they have what's necessary to prevent those odors from going into the community and creating a nuisance in the community. So they will be monitoring based on the findings, based on the conditions that have been set forth, as well as based on the regular requirements of their current permit. They also are only planning to use at the most 12 hours within two non-contiguous days within this period. And for those reasons, I'm pretty sure we can find, I don't know about anybody else, I can find good cause that they have met the conditions necessary to get this short variance.
I agree. I had concerns, definitely, just upon reading the petition. Most concerned I was because I thought that the biofilter was going to be shut down, and I was concerned that there might be a nuisance created, and I didn't understand how that would be taken care of. But I just wanted to commend both parties on coming up with excellent set of proposed conditions, which have taken care of all concerns that I had with regard to how is that H2S going to be controlled with ferric chloride and ferrous chloride, and how are we going to know that there isn't any nuisance? Well, there's going to be amped up monitoring, and if the monitoring reveals heightened or elevated levels of H2S, there's a plan in place for that as well. So, and of course, minimizing all of that time. So I also felt very relieved to hear that it's mostly commercial around, and that the closest sensitive receptor are a significant distance away at 5,000 feet, more so than other cases that we've seen. And so, again, the threat of a nuisance is minimized in that way. And also, as Ms. Torres had pointed out during testimony, Condition 5 of their permit would allow a shutdown of the biofilter completely for up to 96 hours. This is considerably less, and so it just demonstrates that there isn't a significant threat that there would be a nuisance or, in fact, any increased excess emissions, or significant excess emissions. I also just wanted to just add to some of the findings. First of all, if this variance is not granted, then that connection of the new plant 3 to the biofilter cannot take place, and the expansion could not occur. And I think that is certainly without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants, since I'll point out, again for the record, during deliberations, that the petitioner is not asking for any variance from any H2S emission limits at all. So there is not actually any anticipated excess emissions. And I think that's it. Anyone else want to add? Senator?
The condition number 1 says that the petitioner could be in violation of section of the rules and regulations or the order of the district. Would we consider it to permit to be an order of the district?
Yes, it is. And also, there are rules, Rule 202A and 3002C1 and 203B, which require, those are district rules that require compliance with conditions of permits.
Right, but if the condition and permit say you can be shut down for 90 hours, then you're only going to ask for 12, then are you in violation?
The testimony was that the petitioner had asked or inquired of the district whether or not that condition exception applied here, and the answer was no, it does not apply.
Well, in my mind, I'm trying to get it to be clear. If the permit says you're allowed to shut it down for various purposes, the permit.
For maintenance.
For maintenance.
Ms. Byrd was clarifying.
I'm sorry, for maintenance.
For
This
maintenance.
is not considered maintenance.
So this is
It's not considered maintenance of the biofilter.
all right, okay, fine. But then, okay, and condition number 4 talks about the applicant has given consideration to curtailing operation of the source in lieu of obtaining a variance. I think the applicant explained very clearly that if they did not obtain and process the sludge, it would back up in the city and the people's residence. And so therefore, there's no consideration that they could give to closing or curtailing the operation of this plant.
They've given consideration to it, and they realize they cannot do it.
Cannot do that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes. Yeah, it does appear from what the Senator is saying, the condition requires you to vent it to the biofilters all time, and the petition was you didn't anticipate, you anticipated having the fans down so it won't be vented to the biofilter, or the biofilter will not be venting those sources. But it does appear now that they will be on, and it'll be picking up all the emission sources, and all the sources will be vented to the biofilter. So are you in violation of that condition?
We've closed
No, yeah,
testimony,
that's-
but do you have a question that you feel you need reopened, or is it something we can discuss?
Picking back on that, because it does say the reason they're seeking the variance was because they cannot vent, the biofilter will be down during the period while they're doing the connection and so forth. But
It will not be. It is that it is not fully connected, which is the requirement of condition 5 of their permit, because there will be flange put in, and first there will be hole drilled in, and then, so it's not completely connected, but it won't be open to atmosphere anticipated for more than 30 minutes. But the testimony was they would not be shutting down the biofilter as originally considered. Is that-
I just wanted to say that at the opening of the hearing, petitioner did mention that was something they wanted to change in the petition itself.
right. So
No longer is that the case.
yes, and I'm just wondering, it appears that they'll be venting all the sources to the biofilter while it's still going on, even when they are going to do the connection, even in the short duration that they will it might be 20 minutes or so while they do the actual connection, but they'll lay the pipes and so forth. But if all the fans are on and operating, so it's picking up all the gases from all the different areas, the headworks and the clarifiers and so forth. So they will be venting, it'll be going to the biofilter. So I'm just wondering if it's, is that a violation of permit condition if it's still in operation and still in,
The testimony was that it is not, well, is it in full operation, or it's not fully vented, but it's that that's my understanding of the testimony. Oh, should we, let's,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
did you want to, we
Sure,
should
if you
have
don't-
that
yeah,
answered,
it's
and
okay,
do we
yeah.
have three members who, yes, okay, so Mr. Coleman, you may answer that if you had.
The connection from Plant 2 is going to be broken for a period of time. The pipeline will not be totally intact, so it won't be venting from Plant 2 for a period of time until they can connect Plant 2 to the temporary pipeline. So there's going to be that brief period where it will not be vented to the biofilter.
Okay.
And that's because it's not fully vented, is that, may I just ask, since we've reopened the record for this brief, Ms. Torres, if you can just illuminate that, because I believe your answer was it wasn't going to be fully vented, including the entire time that the work will be done, not just that brief 30-minute period. Is that correct?
The brief period is the brief 30-minute period is the period it won't be fully vented. So it is a very short period within that window of time where they're actually doing the connection, because they'll be setting up the piping, installing the nozzle, removing the flange. But when they actually cut into the piping and attach it to the bypass, that's the period of time it's not fully vented. So we consider that to be a not proper operation with our permit.
So the 2 to 6 hour window that I thought, because we were going through that amount of time, and I thought I understood that the 2 to 6 hours that is anticipated to be the actual time for all of the work would result in noncompliance during that entire time, because it's not fully vented. Is that not true?
We don't believe that it will not be fully vented for that whole time period, that it will be a portion of that time. But, we need, the exact time is not known until they actually, cut into the pipe. But the cutting into the pipe and attaching it to the bypass is the period of time that it will not be fully vented.
Okay, so that 20 minutes or so is when it won't be vented.
Yes,
And that's the only time you anticipate noncompliance with your permit conditions,
yes.
even though now the short variance conditions would allow for 12 hours total.
Well, the 12 hours covers the actual tie-in work, which is a series of events. So,
But it specifically says, the total time during which existing foul air sources are not vented to the biofilter to complete the activities specified in 1A and 1B shall not exceed 12 hours, and we would change that to 12 hours total.
yeah, we don't anticipate the period of time where it won't be fully vented to the biofilter to be significant. However, the period of time when they'll be doing the tie-in work is expected to be the 2 to 6 hours for each tie-in. So it's best to make sure that they have the coverage to do that work.
Because during that work time, there could be periods where
Yes.
it is open to atmosphere.
Yes.
Do you have any other questions for her?
No, thank you.
Anyone else, while we are still open, have any questions on that? Okay, then. Okay, then we're gonna.
Actually, we haven't closed it yet, right?
No, we haven't.
Now, how much more gas will you be pulling from the new, I noticed that you're not modifying the biofilter, so I'm assuming it's currently oversized to handle the phase 3 and the anticipated increase from 5 mgd and the gases that are produced?
Yes, it is oversized. So the current flow to the biofilter is about 13,200 cubic feet per minute. And with the expansion, it's expected to be at the design of 23, which we won't be operating that at that flow for some time. It will be about 16,150.
And you got, 10,000 CFM
And we have two
each.
fans, yes.
10,000, okay. So currently it is said as a reduced, you got a variable drive or something that is pulling less air through there right now? It's not at the full capacity.
It can run at the full capacity. It's sized for the 10,750 for each fan.
But there's no changes to the headworks, so the amount of, you're expecting more flow, inflow coming in will increase too, from 15 to 23 MGD, so that the gas extraction from all the other areas I'm assuming is sufficiently designed to handle that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else on those narrow questions? Okay, thank you. We're going to close the record again. And is there anyone else who wishes to add to the discussion at all?
Yeah, I think having the biofilters, which looks like this is designed appropriately to handle both the current flow and the future expansion, and that fact that it's operating most of the time while they're doing the work, except for the short 20-minute or maybe an hour period, it's a good thing. And also knowing that the perimeter monitoring shows complying with the state standard. I think Ms. Torres mentioned it's 0.005 ppm and the state standard is 0.03, shows that they are, even though they may have a higher limit at the biofilter, but the distance, so at the fence line, they're not exceeding the state standard. So we anticipate it won't with this short period of time. So they should be, be okay, not at least in compliance with the state ambient air quality standard.
Thank you. And I also, I am noting that the variance would allow for a greater amount of time not to be vented to the biofilter, but then probably will be necessary. But I feel comfortable with that, given that there is no request for any variance from any H2S or any other emission limit. And so even with that increased time, there is not anticipated to be any excess emissions. Anyone else wish to add to the discussion? Anyone wish to make, Senator?
Right. The granting of the variance will allow them to, if it happens, if there's a mishap where they exceed the emission, then of course this will cover it.
No, it won't. We are only granting, if we should grant this variance, it will only be from what was requested, which is a granting for a short, brief period of time to disconnect from the venting, not to exceed any standards, or any limit. So the answer is no, this would not allow that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Any other discussion? Anyone wish to make a motion? Ms. Byrd?
I'll make the motion. In the matter of Eastern Municipal Water District, case number 4937-58, located at 42565 Avenida Alvarado, Temecula, California, 92590. I move that we issue this short variance, and I know somewhere I wrote down when it commences, but I'll have to look back through my notes.
And would be upon the
Notification?
notifications in 1A.
Okay, upon notification, in the conditions, Exhibit C, wait a minute,
It is.
1A, no, disconnection, no. They have to provide notification at least 48 hours prior. It's in condition 1, I'll just say in condition 1. They have to provide notification to the district as to when it begins, at least 48 hours prior to the disconnection. And it will be for the process mentioned in the petition on page 2. Item number 6, the wastewater treatment process and the biofilters with the appropriate permit numbers there, and it will be from rules on page 3. And that will include, in addition to what's mentioned as condition 5 for both permits, and rule 202A, that will also include 203B, rule 3002C1, and section K, condition 7. Excuse me, condition 8. Can't read my own notes. and it will be with the conditions as mentioned in Exhibit C, with one change that I know of, and that will be in condition number 3. And condition number 3 should then read, the total time during which the existing foul air sources are not vented to the biofilter to complete the activity specified in 1A and 1B shall not exceed a combined total of 12 hours for each, let's drop for each, a combined total of 12 hours for the 2 non-contiguous days within a 90-day period. And the rest will remain the same. And based on what I've heard, I don't think there are, it should be excess emissions estimate, even though that's what the petition says, but based on what I've heard, with no excess emissions. And I think that's I think that will be it. That's my motion.
I'm going to second the motion so long as we add an end to the variance, and I would suggest that the term be to commence, as you suggested, with the notification in condition 1 as refers to 1A, the disconnection and connection to temporary piping, and that it will go for 90 days, but no later than the notice given under condition 1 with regard to 1B, which is the reconnection. So whichever comes first, and for no longer than 12 hours on 2 non-contiguous days within that 90-day period.
I'll accept that.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Senator, how do you vote?
Me too.
Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Palagopalan, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes. And Ms. Byrd?
Yes.
And so it passes 5-0. And thank you. Thank you for very well put together presentation and very well put together conditions.
Thank you.
Do we have any other business board members? Seeing none, we are adjourned for the day. Thank you.